Hello, everybody, and welcome into this most recent edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. I am your host, Jared Mack, and with me is Erik Skopil. Erik, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, doing good. It's hotter than Hades here in Eugene. By the
Yeah,
way, I hate this. I don't want to start with that complaint, but yeah, it was 100 couple of days, last couple of days. So been a deal.
yeah. I'm sure we have listeners from all over the country who don't think that 100 is a lot.
Yeah,
100 is a lot here, and it's okay. We don't have to prices right everybody and have the higher temperatures, but it's the dog days of summer. But today we have a mailbag episode on a Monday, so go us, kind of back on schedule. Who would have guessed? But first, Erik, we have to talk about the tragic passing of Khyree Jackson, who passed away at the age of 24 on the 6th of July in a car accident back home in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Khyree spent 1 year with the Ducks, was a cornerback, had transferred in from Alabama after 2 seasons there, after going to JUCO, after quitting football, after having some hardships in his life. He was ultimately a fourth-round draft pick this past year by the Minnesota Vikings. Um, just a terrible, awful, horrific situation, and something that certainly shocked the Oregon community, the sports world, the Viking fan base. This was just an awful moment on the 6th of July, early morning, figuring out that Kyrie wasn't here. And I know we only had him, or we talked to him, excuse me, for just a season and got to watch him play up close and personal for just a season. But hearing Kyrie's story when he would talk to the media and seeing the type of person he was and how he had changed from his first 2 seasons at Alabama and was really becoming a guy who I thought could be a real impact guy in the NFL level, if he just got some opportunities. For him to no longer be here is just an awful situation.
yeah, it was. I mean, you summed up the fact that this was like a real feel-good story last year. I mean, we didn't know the whole background until we spoke to him maybe like midway through the season. And when you hear kind of all he'd gone through, and he didn't share all of it, I think more of it came out following his draft with the Vikings. There's a couple stories right over the weekend that kind of touched on some of the difficulties he went through. But to get to where he got and to persevere and to really commit himself to trying to do this, and obviously it's just, yeah, I mean, it's a feel-good story turned into a nightmare, essentially. I mean, it's so sad for so many reasons, but I mean, all his dreams, he'd achieved so much to get there, and for it to be taken, the way it was, it's really hard to kind of grapple with that. And I think we hate to start a show kind of thinking this way, but it makes you hopefully appreciate your own life and kind of the fragility of it, because this is a guy who had everything in front of him, and it was taken away tragically for seemingly no fault of his own. So, yeah, and I know we didn't have a ton of interactions with him, but what you're hearing coming out from former teammates, from Coach Lanning, and it seems like a guy who was great in the locker room, who was really well beloved by the team. I mean, this sort of strikes me as slightly different because Spencer was still with the team at the time, but somebody that was really beloved by the Oregon locker room. And not that necessarily changes. I mean, death is death regardless, but it seems like we lost a really great person and a really great football player who had an opportunity to do some special things. And like you, as a Minnesota Vikings fan growing up, whenever a Duck player goes there, I kind of get excited to follow them maybe a little more closely. And and that's very much secondary at this point. But the fact that there's no NFL career and it ends like this is really, really heartbreaking. So yeah, rest in peace. I hate saying all these prayers for the family stuff because it never really means enough in terms of what you can't really change anything, but it's been kind of hard to go through the last couple of days without thinking about it a lot and thinking about him. And these are we're people who are very much on the tangentially talking about this on the surface. We didn't know him all that well, but for people that care so much about Oregon sports, this is really a tough one.
Yeah, 100%. We should also mention that Anthony Lighton Jr. and Isaiah Hazel also passed away in this car accident with Khyree Jackson. So thoughts and prayers to that family as well, or to those families, excuse me, as well. Just a sad day. but something that might happen a little far too often. Make sure everybody takes an Uber.
That's true too. Yeah.
Well, tough to transition, but we're gonna have to try to go right into the mailbag. Erik, lead us away.
Okay. Well, there's really no way to transition from this to talking about football, but we'll try and we'll do our best here. I thought this was a fun question to start off the show and kind of focuses on what will be a really exciting Oregon football season. A question from @GoDucks85: Is the Ohio State game at Autzen the biggest biggest home game in program history? The only others that come to mind are 2009 versus number 5 USC and the first Pac-12 championship game, in 2011, #Autzen Audibles. I did a little bit of research on this earlier today. I think pretty clearly the answer is this is the biggest game played at Autzen ever, just because we'll see what both teams do to this point in the season. But looking at both schedules, I think both teams are going to be unbeaten and probably top 3, top 4, top 5 in the country. I mean, we're just kind of, if you look around at obviously the rankings haven't come out, but the way people are talking about these two teams is like, these are two of the top tier national championship contenders. That's the perception. If these teams take care of business, this is going to be the one, right? I know, talking to friends and family about trying to get tickets for this game, not a cheap ticket. This has been one that's you're going to drop a pretty penny to go to this one. Before I toss it to you, Jared, I had like 4 other games that I thought of that were like comparable-ish in terms of just ranking, or as close as you could get. Like and there might be more, and people can drop them in the comments later if I'm missing a couple. But 2007, Oregon hosted number 9 USC. Oregon was number 5. Actually, the following week, Oregon was number 4, and they hosted number 6, Arizona State. Won both those games pretty comfortably. Probably doesn't compare in terms of like USC. Maybe like prime USC is what Ohio State is now. Arizona State certainly isn't. 2010, number 4 Oregon versus number 9 Stanford. It was a big comeback against Andrew Luck. That was a fun game, but again, Stanford's not Ohio State, even if Stanford was a top 10 team at the time. And then 2014, number 3 Oregon versus number 7 Michigan State, which in the last decade is probably the closest. Still not going to say that one really compares. And I know they played Washington, 22, and that was a pretty decent matchup, but Washington was not a top 10 team at that time either. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. Sorry, there's a long way of getting there, but I just wanted to give a little bit of historical context. I don't think there's been something that compares to this, and certainly from a brand value perspective, very unique that a program like this heads west.
Yeah. This was supposed to be the 2020 game that, didn't happen due to the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of, there's rightfully so a lot of hype because of the status of these two programs and how much better they've gotten over the last couple of seasons. And Ohio State's certainly been at this national title contender for the last, basically decade or more at this point. So Oregon, has some work to do in that category, but for this year, they're right there. They're neck and neck. I am no encyclopedia of Oregon football history. I am sure there's going to be a game that rivals this in some person's perspective, and you are more than welcome to leave those in the comment section below on YouTube or on duckterritory.com. But the only things I could really think of were some of those Stanford games, like back in the like the late 2s, the early 10s, like where Stanford at the time was a perennial like national title maybe contender, where they never really got there, but they're always a really good team and they're always like a top 10 team. And coming into Autzen Stadium against Oregon, who was also a perennial title contender, who never won the big one, but was there for almost every year for 5, 6, 7 years. Those are the only ones I could really think of, and Stanford's a really good brand value. It's just still not comparable. I think this is much different. And yeah, like my girlfriend went to the Ohio State, and
Mm.
her family has thought about like, oh, like maybe we'll come out for the game, and they're Ohio State fans and grew up Ohio State. Like, no, it's like every hotel is out. Um, the tickets are $500-$700 for nosebleed seats at Autzen Stadium. Obviously, it's a smaller stadium, but even if it were 15-20,000, if this was at the big house, or sorry, not the big house, if this was at the Shoe in Columbus, like it would be $500-$600. I don't remember what it was when Oregon played there in 21, but I'm sure it was not cheap.
Yeah, no, it honestly, this type of matchup is why moving to the Big Ten is not the only reason, but this is
It's
why.
a positive.
This
Yeah.
is why, because like I mean, this is I know it was supposed to happen a couple years ago. Stupid pandemic ruined it, but Oregon, Ohio State, and it's actually probably a positive because I do think that 20 Oregon team, had they not lost a couple of guys to, you think about Penny Sewell didn't play that year. I think Thomas Graham didn't play that year. Javon Holland didn't play that year. I think there may be did Diamador play? I can't remember. I was
Demo played.
Demo played, that's right, and Graham didn't. But anyway, there was a couple of key players that did play for Oregon. That Oregon team probably wasn't going to beat that Ohio State team in 2020, especially in retrospect, looking at what the quarterback situation would have been.
Yeah.
But right now, this is one of the best rosters. This is probably the best roster, just top to bottom, Oregon's ever had. You can kind of fight me if you want on some of the specifics of why maybe this team's not as good as past teams. Like they have a real chance to win this game, and the fact that that's part of it too, and it's not just because I looked back, Oregon hosted USC a couple times when USC was the top ranked team in the country, and USC just like steamrolled them 55-17. So This is not that scenario. So this is why this is a bigger home game than like theoretically Ohio State won't be number one and USC was, but like Oregon was favored, I think, by 1 right now. Like this game is going to be absolute dogfight, and I'm honestly would love to fast forward to October to see this one played. All right. Any other things there, Jared, in terms of that game?
I don't think either Oregon or Ohio State will be like number one overall. I think Georgia will still be like the leader in the clubhouse, but I don't think there's going to be much of a difference between Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon, at least for the beginning of the season. There's going to be injuries, there's going to be storylines, there's going to be other things that may happen, or like the chemistry of the team on one is just better than the other, and they're just a better team on paper or advanced metric wise. But it's going to be a national title game in week 6, whatever that is, October 12th. It's going to be two teams that either of them I think could lose that game and still make the college football playoffs, or either of them could win that game and get a top 4 seed and get a bye if the rest of the season goes well. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking as you were talking there, it's because of the new playoff rules. The winner of this is going to control kind of that Big Ten conference bye week. Like if whoever wins that game, theoretically, that's going to be one of the discussion points coming out. Like, okay, you won this one. Now you guys are kind of controlling your own destiny to have that bye, which clearly super valuable come playoff time. All right, second one, and this will be an interesting discussion because I think we could go a couple different ways in terms of how we answer it. But from @Ross_Maselich, how would you rank from a position group and recruiting performance Dan's coaching hires since he's assembled his original staff? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. I don't want to rank like we don't need to go 1 through 10. I don't think. I think that's. I don't know if you did, Jared. Did you, Jared? Okay, good. Okay, because I was if you said you had 1 through 10, I would do the exercise with you because I've kind of mapped out like tiers. Why don't we each do like a top 3, maybe, if that's fair?
Sure.
Just because I think that condenses the exercise, and I also didn't really want to be like these guys are right at the bottom. I don't think these guys are pulling their weight because I think it's a really good staff, and there are probably tiers. But even the guys that you would theoretically put at the bottom are guys who've been really successful.
So good. Yeah.
They're all really good. Maybe prisoner of the moment, but I would put Junior Adams probably as my pseudo number 1. I was just pulling up the recruiting stuff. It's tough, Jared. As I said, we can have a good, fun conversation. 3 cycles, 3 5 stars, 8 4 stars. If we're talking recruiting performance, that takes the cake.
Sure.
And if you're talking on-field performance, last year Oregon's receivers just had the best season ever, and a lot of that was Bo Nix related, which you could tell me is related to another coach who probably needs to be discussed up here, who I have up here at least. But I just think what Junior Adams has done has been really, really impressive. This is, and again, a lot of this is, it's a complicated conversation because I would say like Oregon has not had great receiving statistics or talent previous to this. Some of that has to do with coaches and offensive styles and kind of mentalities, if you get my drift. Like, but undoubtedly Oregon has elevated its receiving talent a lot. And those 3 5 stars and 8 4 stars are only prep recruits. And it doesn't even include adding Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson. So Junior to me would be like my top name. Jared, who would you put number 1? Or did you do that, or what'd you think?
Yeah, no, I have the combo of Kenny and Will Stein. I think what Oregon was prior to Dan Lanning and their offensive abilities, to be nice, is such a 180 from what they do nowadays. And that all started with Kenny Dillingham, where, again, these hires were, well, Kenny was the offensive coordinator at Auburn. Like, I get that. But there was a lot like, well, he wasn't the one calling the plays. He was just on the field. He was the quarterback coach. And so you have some question marks there. Same kind of idea with Mike Norvell at Florida State, too. It's like, well, he wasn't the one calling the plays. So what does he know? And then he comes in here and has a great season with Bo Nix in the first year, where, again, like that first Bo Nix season, like nobody really knew he was capable of being that type of quarterback. And then Will Stein was, again, it's like, well, he's the offensive coordinator at UTSA. Like, it's a fun offense and he's got a talented quarterback, but, it's not a hard conference. Like, yeah, if you have a talented quarterback, you should be good. And it's kind of the same thing. He was only a co-offensive coordinator for a year, then the offensive coordinator, like a lot of question marks. And they both come in here and just done absolutely phenomenal jobs. So I think those are, and then recruiting wise, they've done well. There's some good quarterbacks who have landed here. And, Kenny was only here for whatever it was, like 8 months. So kind of hard to deal with, like, or hard to talk about his recruiting days because they were there and then they weren't there, and it is what it is. But
yeah,
he did get Dante Moore originally, so that was pretty good. And eventually he came back to Oregon, so it all worked out in the end. But I think those are the no-brainer number ones, just because of the impact they've had on the team, the culture, the perception of Oregon nationally, and getting back to the Chip Kelly days that everybody loves to talk about. I think that should be the number 1, at least in my brain.
I had that number 2, and I wrote down successfully recruited and got commitments from Dante Moore, each of them.
Yeah.
Right? Like both
Each
of them did.
Yeah.
I thought I was focused, I think, on the recruiting performance part, so I maybe leaned that way. But also the fact that Stein was able to get Novosad in short order after he was just a longtime Baylor recruit. And a lot of big schools had tried and not been successful there. And obviously Will had a previous relationship. Thought that was really big in terms of solidifying that position, because losing Moore was tough when that went down. That felt like it was putting Oregon in a tough spot in terms of what the future of that position would be. And obviously at that time, we also weren't sure what Bo's plan was, because there was a sense that Bo was probably going to leave or might leave and go pro. So I thought that was really significant. And then to the point about just the offensive, like Adams has had probably a bigger recruiting impact. Stein/Dillingham have had undoubtedly a bigger on-field in terms of just the offense shifting and being really good at what they do. And I think I will also say the fact that they've both been really successful, and I kind of posted about this on the site a couple of days ago, I think provides, like, let's be real, Will Stein's probably going to be a head coach somewhere in the next couple of years if he keeps coaching and developing talent the way he has. It's given Oregon sort of the reputation of like, hey, come here, be an offensive coordinator for X number of years, and then go get a Power 4 coaching job. And I think that will pay off down the line as well, because I have no doubt when Will leaves, and again, it's going to happen, I would imagine. I would be stunned if this guy wants to be an offensive coordinator for his entire career when he's going to have, I think, pretty good opportunities. And when that happens, I think they're going to be able to find a really high-end replacement, probably in the similar mold, like a mid-30s guy who's got really high ceiling in terms of play calling and offensive schematics. So yeah, I think those are for me were the top two. Did you have Junior in your conversation, or what did you do after?
I had Junior at number 2. Yeah.
Okay. Anything to add there, or should we just jump to our threes?
I will say I took more of like the on-field results higher than the recruiting prowess. Like I don't you can be a great recruiter and do absolute shit on the field, so I don't really care about that. I want to see like people improve and development and all that, and I think Junior's done an excellent job, as well as landing kids who are really good.
Yeah, I think he's the full package. 3 for me is tough because I wanted to give credit to a defensive coach. I landed with Chris Hampton, which I think is more of like an upside pick than it is. Like, I think undoubtedly what he's done since he's been here has been positive. The recruiting is really encouraging, and this is also getting ahead of what I think is about to be potentially a crazy run here with players like DJ Pickett and Trey McNutt, whatever you want to call him, Jonah Williams.
Yeah.
Potentially all committing soon. Like Oregon could land like 3 5-star defensive backs along with Dorian Brew and Brandon Finney, who are great prospects. And then you look at what they did the last couple of cycles, and I understand he was recruiting safeties, not corners, but whatnot. Like he's done an incredible job. And just talking to people around the program, you get the sense that this is like a guy who's going to be coaching his own program soon, similar to Will Stein. Like I think he's a future head coach, and probably in short order. And this was not that it was like a shot in the dark at all, but this wasn't a guy who had coached a ton at Power 5 football schools prior. Right. I think he was at Duke previously. Actually recruited Brennan Johnson out of high school, which is kind of a little nugget. Maybe I think most people probably know, but to reiterate, but then was at Tulane prior to coming out to Oregon, was a defensive coordinator there. I just think it's a hire that is going to look better and better the longer he's here. But there's a lot of guys on the defense that you could pick. Like, I think Tony Tuiotti's done a great job recruiting and developing defensive line talent. I think he's super underrated and probably doesn't get enough attention. Tosh Lupoy, even though people were really critical after his first season, defense has taken major strides since. I mean, I think since Dan's taken over, undoubtedly the defense has gotten better and better. So there's some picks on defense, but I went with Chris Hampton.
Yeah, I figured we should do it, or at least I should do a defensive coach as well. But I went with Tosh just because of his genuine improvement, or the defense improvement from year 1 to year 2. Because there were certainly some question marks about Tosh. It's like we all knew that he could recruit, and he's done a good job of that at Oregon. Landing guys like Elijah Rushing and helping land all the defensive line prospects with him and Coach Tuioti. We all knew that he could recruit, but he was let go from Alabama. I don't know if he was necessarily fired, but he was no longer in charge of the defense after a rough year or two, and they didn't really seem to get better. And during that time frame, like Alabama was very prideful on its defensive impact, like they were during the early 2010s, and there are certainly some question marks, even more so like after the first season, where it's like, is this what the defense is going to look like? Like missed tackles, missed assignments, like not big enough. We all remember the Georgia game. We all remember the Washington State game in Pullman, where they couldn't stop a nosebleed for a while, and a lot of that was Cam Ward, but a lot of it was defensive miscues the whole time. And that's no longer the case. This is a good defense, and every player talked about the year 1 to year 2. And I'm always interested to see if the transfers have that same problem, but it doesn't really seem like it. At least it didn't last year with like someone like Jordan Birch or Evan Williams. And it was a damn good defense last year, really good. And again, the games they lost to a first-round quarterback, and 3 drafted NFL receivers and like one of the most talented teams in Washington program history twice. And both very close games and both had really good defensive moments. However, it's a loss. But overall, this team has gotten much better on the defensive side of the ball. And I do give credit to Tosh Lupoy, even though, people want to give all the credit to Dan. Like Tosh is every time anybody speaks to Tosh, they talk about how damn smart he is on the defensive side of the football. And so I give him a lot of credit for how he's kind of turned around Oregon's defense because, again, the years prior to Dan, that was a bit of a problem, other than 2019, where, again, that team was riddled with NFL talent. But it's been really good, and I give Tosh a lot of credit for that.
And just to piggyback off that, for those that don't want to give Tosh credit and want to give it all to Dan, if you think Dan's such a brilliant defensive coach, which everybody should and does, why do you think he went and hired Tosh Lupoy? Do you think he's just hiring bad coaches? You know what I mean? Like if we're going to try to
hiring scapegoats,
there's no way that's what took place. And he hired, because Dan knows defense and knows football, hired a guy he has a lot of respect for, guy he'd worked with before, and brought him in. And clearly that marriage has worked out really, really well. And this year will be, I think, a big test to kind of see how they transition to playing totally different styles of football. I mean, Pac-12 this last year. I think he's going to be fine. I think they're going to do great, but I'm going to be curious to see what sort of challenges there are. Are there any growing pains? Like, do they struggle playing Michigan State or something in early October? And we all have that reaction like we had in Lubbock last year, where it's like, oh my gosh, is this going to be? Is this really what they're going to be this year? And then, of course, it turns around and you see through conference play, it's really, really good. I'll be curious to see kind of how quickly they transition. But I think that's a great pick.
One of these days we should go into like, do we actually think it's going to be a big difference in the Big Ten?
Well, here's a stat I looked up because this was interesting, because I was expecting to see that they ran the ball a lot more in the Big Ten. I actually looked at it. It was minuscule. It was like 1.5 more rush attempts per game, like across the board in the conference.
And what's like, and again,
nothing.
No, and the best thing about Tosh Lupoy's defense is the past 2 seasons has been its rush defense.
True.
And again, I know the Pac-12, despite the statistics, like the games that Oregon has lost have been from the passing attack of Michael Penix and except for the Oregon State game where they couldn't stop a nosebleed on the ground. But which
I don't know. What do we do with that game? I still have no idea what happened. I really don't know.
I have no idea how that happened. I mean, Oregon State just crushed them on the ground. And sorry to rehash this for Oregon fans who are listening, which is probably all of you. But I have no idea. I've never seen anything like that, and might never see it again. But that was definitely a game where they lost due to the run. But there's not a lot of those in general under Tosh Lupoy. And that's why I think like it'll take some adjusting, probably, maybe. I don't know. I don't think it'll take a lot. And I kind of like that for Oregon's sake. I like that. I don't think that there's an NFL quarterback next year, specifically next year, that they're going to face. Like, I think Will Howard is good. Is he Michael Penix or Caleb Williams? Absolutely not. And neither is Dylan Gabriel. Dylan Gabriel is not Bo Nix, but maybe in 2 years, Aiden Childs will be there. But next year, I don't know. I think it's a good run.
I was going to say, I think Aiden Childs is the best draft prospect they're facing, and this will be his first conference game starting.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get, unless he's just incredible out of the gate, you're not going to get, ceiling level Aiden Childs in that game. I agree. Quarterback play is way down. Running back play will be better. They play, Ohio State has like two of the best 5. I don't know however you want to frame it. They're loaded there. Michigan has a great offensive line. Some players they have to replace, but this is, it's a totally different exercise this year. A totally different set of challenges, but it'll be really fun.
Yes. All right. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and do the final 2 questions of this mailbag. And we're back. Welcome back into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Jared Mack. Erik Skopil over here this way if you're watching. We're here with the mailbag, and we have 2 questions left. So, Eric, let's get it off.
This is another one I'll be curious to see where we land because I think there's a couple of different answers. This is from @BigDuckDrew. Whom do you think will be the highest draft pick from this year's team? Doesn't have to be someone draft eligible this year. #Autzen Audibles. There's like a lot of guys who you could pick here who are like, because I think you have to think about certain position groups and like. I'm tempted to pick a guy who isn't draft eligible this year. I don't know if you agree with me, Jared. I think Oregon has a bunch of guys who could be first or second round picks upcoming draft. Maybe you disagree. I'm not sure there's a guy who has a really great path to being like a top 10 pick.
Like not right now.
Yeah.
Nothing that I've seen has led to that. Yeah.
So I kind of was like, okay, what 2 position groups usually have a chance to go that high? And then I picked like 3 guys that play those positions that are talented and young. And I have I don't feel great about any of it because these guys basically, one has played no college snaps and 2 have played 1 season of college football. I said I landed on Dante Moore at quarterback just because that position, as we know, like Bo Nix, I think everybody would probably agree wasn't a top 12 player in that draft, but he plays a position that provides enough value that you took a pick there. Dante Moore doesn't have to be the 12th best player in a draft to go top 12. Same thing. I just said, I think he has a ceiling to be one of those top picks. So I went there as my first, and then just 2 guys off the edge. Elijah Rushing has incredible physical intangibles. Haven't seen this guy really do anything in Oregon uniform. Like even the spring game, it was kind of like, oh, did he play? Did he do much? Who knows? But 6'6", like probably close to 7-foot wingspan, extremely athletic, has to pack on some weight, has to prove he can do a lot of things at this level, but that's a name that came to mind. And then I also threw in Mateo because I think he has similar traits. And I'm really encouraged by what we saw in terms of year 1 development. So those were the people that I kind of landed on. But like I said, I think it's a kind of a fun question because there's a lot of different ways you could go. And you could convince me like Evan Stewart maybe will be talented enough to be up there. I don't know. You could convince me one of these offensive tackles could be up there. Yeah. But I think all 3 of those players have some kind of like reasons that maybe they're not top 10 picks. And if we're shooting for the stars, I'm going to side with the younger guys that have ceilings that I think could go there.
I think Evan Stewart could be a top 10 pick. He just has to show that he can stay healthy and produce at the Big Ten level. And with this offense, that might be the case because he's going to be the most athletic kid on the field basically every time he steps out there. And an elite route runner and elite hands and all these other great features that for a first round wide receiver. And he's been mocked in first rounds in like 2025 mock drafts, which again are so ahead. Like it may not even matter in the end of the day.
Yeah.
But he's there. And sometimes that's a good sign. Sometimes it just doesn't matter. But he has all the physical intangibles. He just needs to produce and stay healthy, which he didn't really produce at the level that I think a lot of people expected out at A&M, but he was also hurt a lot at A&M. So those are some things that he has to work on, but it's tough because I think that's the easy answer. I think like a Johnny or Josh Connerly could get up there, but I don't know. Like there's the like go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, how worried are we about Josh being a first round tackle at 6'4"?
Yeah, that's certainly a question because he's not the, you want your dudes. Who's the guy the Chargers took this past season?
Oh,
like Joe Alt.
Joe Alt. Yeah, sorry. He was like 6'9", 6'10".
Yeah, he's like 6'8", 6'9". So, or like Trent Williams, guys like that, where they're just ginormous human beings. And not that Josh isn't a small human. I almost had to sneeze. But he's not the biggest bird in the room. So yeah, maybe he's not a first round draft pick because of that, but
I don't know. He's super athletic. He does other things great. I just that's why I hesitated with him, was he's like a little undersized.
Yeah, and he has really long arms, which certainly helps, but I don't know, I guess you really want your tackles to be Jaquan McRoy, who maybe could be a name that we all look at one day at a first round pick. But I thought of Elijah Rushing too as guys who were like underclassmen, just because he has like the Kayvon Thibodeau body build where freshman year, I'm not sure how much he's going to do. I don't think he's as good as Kayvon was at a high school. So I don't think that he's going to play that often. But he's got the frame where he could genuinely pack on 50 to 60 pounds of muscle and just put a hand in the dirt and rip through people on the offensive line. So I think he has the potential to get there. Obviously, it all depends on the person itself. We're not first round draft picks, so we don't have to worry about that situation. But these guys, I think Elijah is up there. Mateo, certainly, like those edge rushers are really highly sought after. Maybe a cornerback, like if I don't know if Ioba Degwu is like really good. It's just hard. And then I don't know, could I hedge my bet that Decorian Moore is it? Like in 4 years, like if he signs with Oregon, I feel like he could have like the best chance of being a first round draft pick.
And just on Evan, I agree with the talent. And maybe this is crazy. He's also like not super tall, so maybe I'm just over focusing on that. But I know. I'm just saying that was part of my calculus for like, it just if he had Jurion Dickey's size and he had the same skill, he'd be everything.
Yeah, but like Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith were first round picks. Or even Jamar Chase isn't that tall.
No, I understand. Yeah, but that was kind of the calculus in my head a little bit of like, I want to go with someone with a little more upside and just physical upside. There's some younger guys on the roster. Let's put it this way. If it was players draft eligible this year, I think he's pretty clearly the choice. Jordan Birch has physical tools that are really interesting. And if he has an awesome senior season, he plays a position where you could see him fly up draft boards. But I think at this point, I love Jordan Birch. I picked him as I think the second or third best player on the team when I ranked the players. We'll see. Like he's going to have to put it together a little bit. I don't know if he has that same pedigree. And even though he was a 5-star, has he been mocked in the first round a lot from your vantage point, Jared? Have you seen him? I haven't.
No. So, he just hasn't produced and he's kind of old.
Right.
Not his fault, but that's how it goes.
Right. So I thought this was a really fun question because you had so many different choices here. And you kind of are thinking probably in the quarterback, cornerback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, edge mold, like specifically. You're probably not picking a safety or a running back or a tight end, but Oregon happens to have a lot of good players at a lot of those positions. And I think there's some young guys that are really intriguing, but we might also be asked this question in a year and I'll be like, yeah, no way it's Elijah Rushing because he doesn't look like he's going to do anything. Or we might be like, oh, well, that was a great pick because he looks great. So I don't know.
We'll see eventually.
All right, let's move on to the final question here from @EnoAce445. What are the chances of Oregon getting DJ Pickett, Trey McNutt, and Jonah Williams in this year's class? And what do you think that means going forward for Oregon recruiting? Thanks. Keep up the great work. #Autzen Audibles. Thank you, Eno. Well, we should acknowledge that there hasn't, I don't think, been a crystal ball in 24/7 for any of those players towards Oregon. There has, though, been a lot of scuttle and a lot of discussion, certainly on our message board. Certainly, we've heard some things talking to some of the national analysts that Oregon is in good shape for these players. Getting all three would be just outrageous. And kind of circling back to the conversation we had on Friday?
Sure.
Yeah.
Friday.
Whenever it was. I don't know. If they do pull all these three guys, like what does it mean for this class? It means this is going to be legitimately like already the best class in program history and kind of gives them like an outside, maybe not that outside chance if they finish really strong elsewhere for the number one class nationally, because that would bring them to what, like 6 5-stars, which is not a conversation I felt like we'd ever had. We'd ever be having, I should say. I think Pickett and McNutt seem like the ones that there's the most confidence in right now. And Pickett in particular is announcing in about 10 days No, about 7 days. Sorry, I think he's on the 17th.
Yep.
Seems like that's headed in a good direction, but recruiting can change, and even in a week, it could shift a totally different direction. But that would be the one that's most imminent, it seems to me, and the one that right now seems like there's the most momentum. But I wouldn't discount Oregon getting any of these recruits, and I don't know if they're going to go 3 for 3, but it wouldn't be surprising if they did, I guess.
Would you like to know what the class ranking would be with all three of those guys added on?
Lay it on me.
29747.
Yeah.
Which would be better than last year's class with 9 fewer recruits by 4 recruiting points or composite points, excuse me. Pretty good. Yeah, the odds of landing all of them, those things are never high. We're talking about kids that every single school in the country is going after. Is it possible? Sure. Why not? I think you have to. I think you feel good about the prospect of Pickett and McNutt. Those things have been going well for Oregon, at least in the last couple months. Getting those guys on campus and showing them what they can do. Jonah Williams is an interesting recruit. I actually think Oregon is doing kind of well with him. Jonah Williams is an incredible baseball player.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if a lot of people know that. Certainly has visited campus for football, but also has visited campus for baseball. And I think the success of the baseball team, again, these guys are two-way players. Like we saw this with Robbie Ashford a couple of years ago. Like focus was more on football than it is baseball, even if they're a better baseball player. So I'm not sure how much it helps, but I do think that it helps that Oregon baseball has been pretty good the last couple of seasons and would have a plan for him as an elite outfielder. But I think Oregon is I think they're doing really well with 2 of these guys. And I think that Jonah Williams could be a sneaky, like this is actually a very good prospect of landing. I think he's like sneaky in the background of this is a good player who might actually be thinking harder about Oregon than some people think. But again, landing all 3 is going to be very difficult, if damn near like impossible, just because of how highly sought after all these guys are. Because again, that would be 6 4 or 6 5 stars, which is unheard of for most classes every single year, and definitely an Oregon class. I think the most an Oregon class has been is 3, and that was with Stool, Flo, and Dante Manning. This would be double that, which I don't know. I still think of that Georgia class from 2019, 2020, where it was 7, and it was like, oh my God, like what? Like how is this physically, humanly possible? This is just one below that.
How many did A&M land in 21 or 2, whatever that monster class was?
Yeah, I was just gonna go look at that because
give that a Google.
They got that. Oh, I lied. They got 8.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought they had so many good players in that class, and like 2 of them are still on their roster. And then I guess just to answer the second part, what do you think this means going forward for Oregon recruiting? It shifts the perception even more.
Yeah, I mean, the perception it's pretty good.
Like the perception already right now is like Oregon's pissing off a lot of teams on their trail. Like they just are out they're pulling players that are Texas like once like atop their board into Corian Moore and Dorian Brew. These are guys that like Texas was all in on, and Oregon snags them. If they pull Williams from that state, if they could finish on Pickett and McNutt, and especially you look at the geography of those 2 recruitments, like that's the thing that would be really impressive if this all comes together, is just the geographical disadvantages Oregon is up against here to actually secure these guys, because that's always one of the things that you can kind of look at when like A&M or Georgia or Bama or Ohio State pull these incredible classes. Like the proximity to these 5-star kids is really impressive. And of course, they're going to go out of the region to the West Coast or to the Midwest or the Southeast, depending upon where they're located, to pull some top guys. But the fact that Oregon would be able to do this, basically, like if they get all these 5 stars, they're basically all out of region. which I would guess is kind of never happened before. That would be the part to me that would really stand out, is you'd go like 3 of these guys are from Texas, a couple guys from Florida, a guy from Ohio. Like that's unusual to say the least. Yeah.
Well, and I'm just going through like the California top 10 kids. How many in-state teams do you think have landed one of the top 10 California kids?
Well, I know A&M has cleaned up, which is interesting. USC has a quarterback up there, I think. Probably just USC.
USC has one player, and that's Matayo Tagaoa. I can't pronounce this guy's name. Linebacker, who's the fourth best player. Texas A&M right now has 4 of the top 11, excuse me. Alabama has 3 and Oregon has 2. Penn State has the other top 10 player, Darius Dixon. There's not a lot of great West Coast talent this year, and I think Oregon knows that, and obviously other schools know that, and they're trying to get in there. Like Washington, which is sneaky, like a really good hotbed for recruiting, has 2 4-stars this year. One of them is Rainey Sale, Zadarius Rainey Sale, great name. Another linebacker who's going to Washington is a top 150 kid, like a real good recruit. And then the other guy is Jonathan Epperson, an athlete who's a 4-star but isn't ranked in the top 247. I don't think is ranked in the composite either, but I'll check. It's not great. It's 342 in the composite. You know, this is like the same that had Connerly and Emeka Egbuka and Sam Howard, whatever Heward. Sam Heward, all 5-stars like in the same calendar year, and like was a really good recruiting cycle. So the talent on the West Coast isn't great, and it's good to see that Oregon can go out to other states, I guess specifically Texas in a lot of these cases, and go land some of those big boys, because that's what A&M is doing in California. They're doing the reverse Oregon. They're going into California and landing those really talented kids, while Oregon is going into Texas and landing those really talented kids. So it's a good sign. And if they land all these kids, then yeah, it's a tremendous sign for Oregon recruiting. It's like, oh, well, this is really, really, really real now. It's not just like, hey, nice job landing like 2 5-stars. Like, that's really good for you guys. I'm Georgia, and I'm gonna go land 8 5-stars this year. Like, congrats, guys. Way to try. It's like, oh, okay. You took 3 players that we wanted too. This is a war now. So it's a good time. It's a good time for Oregon football recruiting.
One last thought, and it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it also means you get more people complaining that Oregon is paying everybody and they're just dropping the biggest bag, which has become kind of the most fun, silly part of this whole thing. And not that perception is like completely wrong in terms of Oregon has, I think, a really, really good NIL collective with Division Street that's really dialed in. I mean, you have like former Nike executives who've been in like acquisitions of top athletes running this thing. But the amount of schools, because everybody can drop the bag, by the way, the amount of schools complaining about this, and specifically about Oregon, is already ratcheting up. And if they were to pull these 3 kids again from out of region, the state of Texas, the state of Florida, those guys there would just be a lot more bitching, which would be kind of enjoyable and funny. And would also sort of, I don't know, especially after Oregon just dropped that Nike little documentary thing recently. There would be a lot more of that. So that would be another thing it would mean for Oregon recruiting, I think.
Yeah, oh, that's very funny. It's like, oh, they're just going to Oregon because of the money. And it's like, I'm sorry, but if you're one of these teams going after a 5-star, like all of these monetary values or offerings are comparable. There's probably some schools that are offering more, and there's probably some schools that are offering less. But I think for a lot of these kids, a lot of the real good 5-star kids, I don't think money is like the determining factor. If I'm a 4-star recruit and like one school offers me, I don't know, made up numbers, but like 100K versus 50K. That's a big difference. When you're one of these 5-star kids, like the money thrown around is astronomical already. Like any of those deals is going to be great. They're going to be great for right now. It's going to be hopefully great for lineage down the line. Like it's not going to matter, but I don't know. It is very funny. But if another school were to land these kids, it would have been the dedication and the craft.
They did it the right way. Yeah, they did it the right way.
Everybody's throwing down money. Who was it the Nebraska AD who like came over from Washington and is like, Ohio State and Oregon have NIL budgets in the 20s of millions of dollars. It's like, okay.
What's yours?
A lot of schools, like a lot of schools are probably in the 10s to the 20s of millions of dollars. Like, and that's how it is these days. If you don't have the money, like it's not going to be helpful. And Oregon is very fortunate that they have Bill Knight as a donor. And I get that, blah, 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 and all the Nike stuff. But Texas A&M has some money, I've heard. You know, they paid Jimbo Fisher a lump sum of $65 million to get them out. And that was fine. So I'm sure they have some money to go around for NIL stuff, just like a lot of other schools. So it's not just Oregon. But that's my rant for the day. My calm, concise rant.
Well done. Yeah. Recruiting. It's a blast, and being on message boards or on social media, seeing reactions to kids picking schools. Always good for a good chuckle, especially if you're Oregon right now.
Yeah. And if you didn't think this was happening before the 2020s, yeah, go watch Pony Excess, man, on ESPN. They were handing out like $50,000 to $80,000 to recruits in the 1980s. So it's been a long time. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions?
That was the last one we had. And no, I think I'm good.
Cool. I think I'm good too, which means you, the listener, you're good too. That'll do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Hope you enjoyed this mailbag episode. Please leave a like, comment below, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or whatever the hell you listen to this service on. That'll be it for me.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.